Miss Calloway.
She kissed the Duke. While he was sleeping, he was awake the whole time and said nothing until she tried to walk away. She kissed him at 11:30 on a Tuesday night, in a room lit by a single dying candle, with the rain coming hard against the windows and every sensible thought she had ever possessed apparently fled to somewhere warmer. He did not move. His breathing stayed even. His hands stayed still at his sides. The candlelight caught the edge of his jaw, the straight line of his mouth, and revealed nothing at all, except that Edward Ashford, Duke of Marath, was the most accomplished liar she had ever had the misfortune of loving. She straightened. She smoothed her skirt with both hands. She turned toward the door. "Miss Calloway." His voice came from directly behind her, low and unhurried, with that quality it always had, like a man who has already seen 3 moves ahead and is simply waiting for the board to catch up. She stopped walking. She did not turn around. "If you take one more step," he said, "I will spend the rest of my life pretending I did not feel that." Her hand was on the door frame. The wood was cold under her fingers. She turned around. Mara Calloway arrived at Ashford House on the 12th of October with 2 trunks, a letter of introduction, and the expression of a woman who has already decided that crying about something is a waste of time she does not have. She was 24 years old, the daughter of a disgraced solicitor, and she was there to serve as secretary to the Duke's ailing mother, a position she'd obtained through the recommendation of a family friend and the complete absence of any other option. She was not afraid of work. She was not afraid of difficult people. She'd grown up in a house where money left before warmth did, where pride was the only currency that never ran short, and where her father's fall from respectability had taught her that the world arranged itself very quickly into people who needed things done and people willing to do them, and that there was no shame in being the second kind as long as you did it with your eyes open. She had held 3 positions in 4 years. The first had ended when the family relocated to the continent and could not take additional staff. The second had ended when the lady of the house recovered her health and decided she did not, after all, require assistance. The third had ended badly, in the way the position sometimes ended badly, when the man of the house had one idea about what a secretary's role encompassed, and the secretary had a different one, and the secretary had made her position on the matter so plain that no further discussion was necessary or possible. She had not cried about any of it. She had packed her trunks and found the next position and gone. What she had not previously encountered was a house like Ashford. She understood this within the first hour, not from anything dramatic, but from the quality of the silence in it. Most houses she had worked in had a kind of managed noise, the constant low hum of people performing their functions at the correct volume. Ashford was quiet in a different way. Quiet like a room where someone has recently stopped speaking and the words are still settling. She met the Duke on her second day, in the corridor outside his mother's sitting room. He was tall in a way that seemed less about height and more about how he occupied space, as though rooms adjusted slightly when he entered. He had dark eyes that moved over things with an assessing quality, and a mouth set in the arrangement of a man who has learned that silence is more effective than most sentences. He looked at her, the way you look at a piece of furniture someone has moved without asking, noting the change, not yet decided about it. "You are the new secretary," he said. "I am," she said. "My mother says you have a sharp mind." "Your mother is kind." "My mother," he said, "is many things. Kind is not the first one." He studied her for another moment. "She also says you answer back." "Only when answering is called for." Something moved across his face. There and gone too fast to name. He stepped aside to let her pass. She passed. She did not look back to see if he was watching. He was watching. The Duchess of Marath was 71 years old and confined to her rooms by a chest complaint that had been threatening to become serious for 3 years and had not quite managed it, possibly out of respect for her refusal to accommodate it. She was a compact, white-haired woman with eyes like her son's, and a mind that had lost nothing to age except patience for people who wasted her time. She took to Mara within the first afternoon. "You don't simper," she said approvingly, watching Mara sort the correspondence with a speed and organization the previous secretary had apparently never managed. "The last girl simpered. It exhausted me." "Simpering seems inefficient," Mara said. "It is entirely inefficient. It is also, apparently, what is expected of young women in polite society." A pause. "You are not particularly polite, are you?" "I am when politeness is useful." The Duchess made a sound that was almost a laugh. "We will get on well." They did. The work was steady. Correspondence, household accounts, reading aloud in the evenings when the Duchess's eyes tired, the management of visitors who arrived to pay respects and needed redirecting when they overstayed. Mara was good at redirection. She had learned early that the most effective way to move a person was to make them feel the movement was their own idea. The Duke visited his mother every evening at 6. He stayed 40 minutes, long enough to demonstrate genuine attention, short enough to prevent the conversation from reaching the things neither of them knew how to say. Mara was always present. It was part of her role. She learned him in those 40 minutes the way you learn a room in low light, gradually, by accumulation. The way he held his cup without drinking from it when his mother said something that landed wrong. The way he asked questions that sounded like conversation, but were careful assessments. The way he sometimes looked at his mother when she wasn't watching, not the composed authority he showed everyone else, but the face of a man who was afraid of something he could not manage by being better at it. He was afraid of losing her. He had been afraid for a long time, and he had no language for it that fit inside the 40 minutes. So he came every evening and held his cup and said careful things and left. Mara watched this and said nothing. It was not her place to speak to it, but she filed it away with everything else she was learning about the architecture of this house, the way the quiet in it came not from emptiness, but from things that had not yet found their way out. The first real conversation happened in the library at 9:30 on a Wednesday evening, 3 weeks in. When Mara came to return a volume the Duchess had finished and found the Duke at the far window with a glass of brandy and the look of a man who had been thinking too long about something he couldn't resolve. She crossed to the shelf. She slid the book into its place. She turned to leave. "What did you think of it?" he said. She stopped. "I beg your pardon?" "The book. My mother said you read it alongside her. What did you think?" "I thought the third chapter was stronger than the author believed it to be," she said. "He kept apologizing for his conclusions when he should have let them stand." The Duke turned from the window. "Why do you think he apologized?" "Because he knew they were right and was frightened of being right in public." A pause. He was looking at her with that assessing quality again, but something in it had shifted. Less like furniture now, more like something he hadn't placed yet and was not in a hurry to misidentify. "Sit down, Miss Calloway," he said. "It's late, Your Grace." "It is. Sit down anyway." She sat down. She would examine this later, at some length, the fact that she did it without argument. They talked for an hour and 20 minutes. About the essays first, about whether the natural sciences required a different standard of proof than philosophy, about whether certainty was ever genuinely available to anyone, or whether all conviction was simply well-managed doubt. He was sharper than she had assumed, which she acknowledged privately as a failure of assumption on her part. She had expected, because he was wealthy and titled and moved through the world with that composed authority, that his thinking would be conventional. It was not conventional. It moved sideways sometimes, connecting things she had not seen as connected, and twice he said something that stopped her mid-sentence and made her reconsider a position she had held for years. She did not tell him this, but she felt it, the specific, slightly uncomfortable sensation of a mind being stretched by another mind, the mental equivalent of a muscle discovering it has more range than it knew. When she finally stood to leave, he stood also, reflex, breeding. He was closer than she had realized. The fire had burned low, and the room had contracted around them in the way rooms do late at night, and she was aware, with more precision than was comfortable, of the distance between them. "Good night, Your Grace." "Good night, Miss Calloway." She walked to the door. She did not look back. He did not move until she was gone. She was halfway up the servant staircase when it happened. Not a thought exactly, more like a door opening in a room she had believed was empty. She stopped on the fourth step with her candle and understood that she was not thinking about the essays. She was thinking about the quality of his attention, the way he had listened, not waiting for her to finish so he could speak, but actually listening, the way that was different enough from ordinary listening that she had noticed it and now could not stop noticing it. The way he had gone briefly still when she said something that surprised him, as if he needed a moment to take it in before he responded. No one had listened to her like that in a very long time. She stood on the staircase longer than was necessary, and then she went to bed and lay in the dark and thought firmly about the essays until she fell asleep. She did not think about the quality of his attention. She was very deliberate about this. Edward Ashford stayed in the library after she left. He did not read. He sat in the chair she had occupied and looked at the fire and turned over something she had said. Not the argument about certainty, though that had been unexpectedly rigorous, and he was still examining it. Something smaller. A remark about her father delivered without self-pity, with the plainness of someone who has looked at a hard thing long enough that they no longer need to dress it. I had an idea of him too. It grew up into something more accurate and considerably less comfortable. He had known people who said things like that. What he had not encountered was someone who said it as a plain statement of fact, without asking for anything in return. No consolation, no acknowledgement, no careful performance of resilience designed to make the listener feel the speaker's strength. Just the thing itself, offered cleanly and then set aside. He refilled his glass. He did not drink from it. Outside, the last of October was settling into the grounds, with the coldness of a season that has stopped pretending. Inside, the fire went to embers. He was still there when it did. He was thinking about the space between what a person said and what they meant, and about how the gap between those two things was usually where everything important lived, and about how she seemed to have no gap at all. Or rather, the gap was there, but it was honest. You could see its shape. It was not concealment, but discretion, which was an entirely different thing. He went to bed at 1 a.m. and slept poorly, and did not examine why. October became November. The evenings in the library became a pattern. Neither of them named it. She would come to return a book or retrieve a reference, and he would be there, and they would talk, and an hour would pass, and then another, and she would leave, and he would stay, and the next evening it would happen again. The topics moved outward from ideas into something more personal, not confessional, nothing that dramatic, but honest in the way that accumulated over time into something that felt significant, without either of them having made a decision to make it so. One evening, she arrived to find him already seated with 2 cups of tea on the side table, as she stopped in the doorway. He did not look up from the letter he was reading. "Mrs. Hartwell makes it too strong," he said. "I assumed you would want it the same way." She stood in the doorway for a moment. He had noticed. 3 weeks of evenings, and he had noticed how she took her tea and said nothing about it, and simply done something with the information. She crossed to the chair. She sat down. She picked up the cup. "Thank you," she said. "It's tea," he said, still reading. It was not just tea, and they both knew it, and neither of them said so. She went back to her room that night and sat at her writing table with her pen in her hand, and did not write anything. She was not going to record in her journal the fact that a man had made her tea correctly, and that this had lodged in her chest like a small warm stone she could not dislodge. She was not that variety of person. She was in considerable trouble, and she was beginning to understand that ignoring it was not going to make it smaller. The conversation that crossed a line happened on a Thursday evening in the second week of November, and it began with Byron. The Duchess had been rereading him. She went back to Byron every autumn with the cheerful ruthlessness of a woman who knew exactly what she was doing. And Mara had made some remark to the Duke about the dishonesty of men who performed suffering in verse while arranging their actual lives with considerable comfort. "That is a severe reading," he said. "It is an accurate one. You think all performed emotion is dishonest. I think performed emotion is its own category," she said. and it is not the same thing as felt emotion, and it does not deserve the same name. And the difference is? Felt emotion costs something, she said. Performance is designed to cost the audience. He was quiet. The fire had burned to a steady low heat, and the room had that quality it got after 10 o'clock. Contracted, separate from the rest of the house, existing at a slightly different temperature than everything beyond the door. You are describing my entire social existence, he said. It was said dryly. 3 weeks ago, she would have taken it as deflection. I know, she said. He looked at her. Not the assessment, something more direct, something that did not have the managed distance in it. Does it bother you? He said. The performance? That you can see through it. She considered this honestly, because he was asking honestly, and she had learned by now that he deserved the same back. It bothered me at first, she said. It seemed like deliberate distance, a decision to be unreachable. She paused. Then I understood it was not distance from me in particular. It was simply the only available architecture. She looked at her hands around the cup. That bothered me considerably less. The silence that followed was not their companionable silence. It had a different weight, the weight of something said more plainly than intended, landing in a space neither of them had prepared. Miss Calloway, he said, and then stopped. She waited. I have been... He stopped again, his hands on the arms of the chair, very still. I am not accustomed to being seen with any accuracy, he said finally. I find I do not know what to do with it. You do not have to do anything with it, she said. No, he said. I find that I want to. He looked at her steadily. That is the part I do not know what to do with. The fire made the only sound in the room. Mara set down her cup. Her legs were steadier than they had any right to be as she stood. Good night, Your Grace, she said. Good night, Miss Calloway. She walked to the door, her hand on the frame, the wood cold under her fingers, as it always was. But the room behind her was different, and she could feel it at the back of her neck all the way up the stairs. She sat on the edge of her bed in the dark and pressed both hands flat on her knees and understood with complete clarity that she had passed the point where this was a problem she could manage by being sensible about it. She had arrived somewhere else entirely. The question was what she intended to do about it. She did not sleep well. She lay awake and listened to the house settle and thought about a man saying, I find that I want to, in a voice stripped of everything except the plain fact of it, and felt the plain fact of it settle into her chest, alongside the small warm stone that had been there since the evening of the tea. By morning she had decided nothing, except that deciding nothing was itself a decision, and that she was going to have to do better than that. The next 3 evenings, she found reasons not to go to the library. On the first evening, she told herself she was tired, which was true, but not the reason. Then on the second evening, she had genuine correspondence to finish, 3 letters that had been waiting a week and could not wait further, and she sat at her writing table and wrote them with a focus and speed that would have impressed her under other circumstances. On the third evening, she simply sat in her room with a book open in her lap and read the same page 4 times and retained none of it, and finally set the book face down on the nightstand with more force than was warranted and looked at the ceiling. She was avoiding a library. She, who had never run from a difficult thing in her adult life, was avoiding a room in a house where she worked, because sitting in it felt like standing at the edge of something with no clear view of the bottom. She thought about her father, about the way she had sat across from him when he told her what he had done and had not looked away, had not softened it for either of them, had simply looked at the true shape of it until she could see it plainly. She had been 20 years old. It had been the hardest thing she had ever done, and she had done it because looking away would have been a form of lying. And she did not lie to herself about things that mattered. She was lying to herself about this. Not in words. She had not said, I do not care about him. This is nothing. But in action, which was worse. Avoidance was its own kind of lie. She got up. She picked up her candle. She went downstairs. He was there. He had a book open, but he was not reading it. When she came through the door, he looked up. not startled, not performing unsurprise. He simply looked at her, the way he had been looking at her since Thursday, with the managed distance reduced to something much thinner, almost transparent, like glass you could see through if you stood at the right angle. She sat down. The tea was there, the right strength. "You were avoiding the library," he said. "I was. And yet." "I decided avoidance was beneath me," she said. Something in his face shifted. Not a smile, not quite, but the movement toward one. "It generally is," he said quietly. They sat in silence for a while. Not the silence of people who have nothing to say, but the silence of people who have too much and are choosing, for the moment, to set it aside and simply be in the same room. Outside, the November wind came against the windows in gusts and retreated and came again. The fire moved. She thought, "I could do this every evening for the rest of my life and not find it wanting." She did not say this, but she thought it with a completeness that left no room for qualification, and the having thought it settled into her alongside everything else she was carrying, and she understood that she had not actually been deciding whether she felt something. She had been deciding whether to admit that she did. The Duchess found her the following afternoon in the small sitting room off the main corridor, working through a stack of household invoices that had been neglected since September. "Leave those," the Duchess said, settling into the chair across the writing table with the deliberateness of a woman who has made a decision and intends to act on it before she loses the inclination. "I want to talk to you." Mara set down her pen, and the Duchess looked at her for a moment with those river-stone eyes that missed nothing and had never pretended otherwise. "My son," she said without preamble, "is an intelligent man who has spent 12 years being careful in ways that have cost him considerably more than he knows." Mara said nothing. "He was engaged once," the Duchess continued. "Did he tell you?" "In passing." The girl was perfectly pleasant. She simply wanted the idea of him rather than the substance. The idea was easier to manage. She paused. "He has not allowed anyone close enough since to discover the substance. It seemed simpler, less costly." "Your Grace, I am not finished." The Duchess's tone was not unkind, but it was not a suggestion. "He is not a man who speaks of things directly. He never has been. He was like this at 7 years old. He would come in from the gardens with a scraped knee and tell me about the bird he had seen while bleeding on my carpet rather than mention the knee." A pause that contained something private in it, old and worn smooth with time. It was infuriating, and it was entirely his father, and I loved him for it, and wanted to shake him for it in equal measure. Mara sat very still. "He has been staying in the library until 1 in the morning, the Duchess said. "He has not done that in years." She looked at Mara with the directness of a woman who has earned the right to it. "I am not telling you what to do. I am simply telling you what I observe." She stood, smoothing her skirts with the efficiency of a woman for whom every movement had purpose. "The invoices will keep until tomorrow." She left. Mara sat at the writing table for a long time after, looking at the small oil painting of the Shropshire hills above the fireplace, painted in summer, all green and gold, as distant from November as it was possible to get. She thought about a man bleeding on his mother's carpet and talking about birds. She thought about 12 years of being careful. She thought about architecture built from necessity and what happened to people who lived inside it long enough that they forgot they had built it themselves and could therefore take it down. She picked up her pen. She went back to the invoices, but her mind was not on the invoices, and she did not pretend otherwise. The Duchess took a turn 3 days later, on the 14th of November. Nothing catastrophic. The doctor arrived within the hour and said so in the measured tone of a man who understood that catastrophic was a relative term, and chose his language accordingly. "Rest," he said. "Quiet. No visitors, no excitement, no stares for at least a week." He would return in the morning. Mara managed the rest of it. She redirected the doctor to the kitchen for tea while she spoke with Mrs. Hartwell about the necessary adjustments to the household schedule. She sent word to the Duke, who was at the estate office across the grounds, in language calm enough not to alarm and specific enough to communicate the actual situation. She intercepted the two cousins who arrived at 4:30 with flowers and good intentions and no awareness of their own volume, fed them in the downstairs parlor. They answered their questions with enough information to satisfy and not enough to generate further questions, and had them in their carriage before 5. She answered the afternoon correspondence. She rescheduled 3 appointments. She spoke with Cook about the adjustment to the evening meal. She did all of this steadily, without urgency, moving through the house with the efficiency of a person who has learned that competence is most useful when it is invisible, that the best management is the kind no one notices, because nothing goes wrong. The Duke arrived at 3:30. He came through the front door and into the corridor where she was speaking with Mrs. Hartwell, and she watched the look on his face when he registered that things were in hand. His mother resting, the cousins dealt with, the doctor come and gone and his instructions already being followed. He looked at her across the corridor. He said nothing. She gave him the doctor's exact words and her own assessment alongside them. What she had observed, what she thought it indicated, what she had done, and what remained to be done. She gave it to him plainly, without softening and without drama, because he was a man who dealt better with plain information than with cushioned information, and she knew that about him now, the way she knew how he took his tea. He listened. He nodded. He went upstairs to see his mother. He came back down an hour later and she was still in the corridor, working through the last of the day's necessities. And he stopped a few feet away and looked at her with the expression she could see through now, the glass thin enough that the thing behind it was entirely visible. "Thank you," he said. "It's my position," she said. "No," he said quietly. "It is considerably more than your position, and we both know that." She looked at him. He looked at her. "Go and rest," she said. "I will manage the evening." He did not move immediately. He stood there in the way he sometimes stood, as though he had something to say, and was deciding whether the room was the right kind of private for it. Then he nodded. He went. She stood in the corridor alone and breathed. By 9:30, she had sent everyone to bed and dealt with everything that could be dealt with. She sat with the Duchess for an hour while she slept, the old woman's breathing easier now, the lines of her face smoothed into something younger and less defended. Mara sat in the chair beside the bed and watched her breathe, and felt, without warning, the specific exhaustion of someone who has been holding things together so long that the moment the crisis passes, all the weight arrives at once. Not just the day's weight, all of it. 3 positions in 4 years and the packing of trunks and the starting again. Her father's face across the table. The loneliness of being capable in rooms where capability was required and personhood was not. The decision, made somewhere in the middle years, to want only what she could provide for herself, because wanting things that required someone else was the most dangerous kind of wanting. She sat in the chair until the Duchess's breathing settled into the deep regularity of real sleep. And then she went downstairs. She meant to go to her room. She had known for some time that she was not going to go to her room. The library was dark except for the fire, burned low, and one candle on the side table guttering in a draught. He was in the chair, still head tilted back slightly, one hand resting open on the arm of the chair with a vulnerability she had never seen from him while he was awake. The brandy on the side table was untouched. His face in the low light had no composure in it because there was no one present to compose it for, and what was left without it was simply a man. Tired, a little worn, present in his own body in a way he was not when the machinery of being a duke was running. She crossed the room. She stood over him, his face in the dying candlelight, the crease between his brows present even in sleep. Still working on something, still carrying it, the corner of his mouth where she had spent 2 months carefully not looking. She had run from 3 evenings of this. She had sat in her room and been sensible and stared at the ceiling and been sensible some more. She had decided nothing, and in deciding nothing had decided everything, because here she was, standing in a dark library at 11 o'clock at night, and there was nothing sensible left in her. She leaned down. She pressed her lips to the corner of his mouth, light, brief, over before she'd finished deciding to do it, which was perhaps the only way it was ever going to happen. She straightened. She smoothed her skirt with both hands. She turned toward the door. Miss Calloway. His voice, low, unhurried, not the voice of a man woken from sleep. She stopped, in the cold wood of the door frame under her fingers. "If you take one more step," he said, "I will spend the rest of my life pretending I did not feel that. The fire, the rain, nothing else." She turned around. He had not moved from the chair. He was looking at her, and all the glass was gone. Whatever managed distance had remained was not there now, and what was underneath it was the plain face of a man who has stopped pretending, which was, she discovered, the most extraordinary thing she had ever seen. "How long?" she said. "Since the library, the first evening." A pause. "When you told me the author was apologizing for conclusions he should have let stand." She felt this land. "You said nothing." "You were my mother's secretary." His voice was even. "And I am practiced at saying nothing." "You were awake the entire time." "Yes." "You let me—" "I was giving you the choice," he said, "to walk away. You had not asked for any of this. I was not going to force a decision on you before you were ready to make it." The rain against the windows. The guttering candle. "That was," she said carefully, "either very considerate or very cowardly." "Both," he said, "in about equal measure." She looked at him. He was still entirely still in the chair. That deliberateness she knew now was not coldness, but its opposite, the stillness of a man holding himself carefully because he did not trust what happened when he stopped. "Tell me what you were thinking," she said, "while you were pretending." Something crossed his face, startled almost. "You counted." "I counted," she said. "Tell me." He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice had the quality it had in the library on its best evenings. No management, just the thing itself. "I was thinking that if I moved, you would know. And that if you knew you would have to make a choice I had no right to force before you were ready to make it." He paused. "And I was thinking that I had spent 2 months being more genuinely myself in this room than I have been anywhere in 12 years, and that the thought of pretending otherwise was—" Something moved across his face, through the composure he no longer had enough of to cover it. "Impossible," he said. "That is the honest word. Not difficult. Impossible." She crossed the room. She sat in the chair across from him, not retreating, not beside him, but facing him directly with the low fire between them and the rain outside, and no pretending left in either of them. "I have been in considerable trouble," she said, "since the evening you made tea without being asked." He looked at her steadily. "The evening you—" "I know which evening," she said. A pause. The fire moved. His face, the real one, the one without architecture, was doing something she had no category for and was not going to rush into categorizing. "I am your mother's secretary," she said. "You are. I have no money and no connections, and I answer back. Consistently and without apology," he said. "And you are a duke." Regrettably, she looked at him. He looked at her. "I want you to know," she said, "that I'm not standing here because you are a duke. I want that to be plain between us." "I know," he said. After a moment, "I think that may be the first time anyone has said that to me and meant it." "Then the people around you have been inadequate," she said. Something broke open in his face, the way a window breaks open on a warm day. He smiled, the real one, the one that changed everything, that arrived suddenly and showed her the face of a man who had been careful so long, he had almost forgotten he did not have to be. He rose from the chair. He was very close now, and the candlelight was nearly gone and the fire was low, and she was aware of him with a precision and completeness that left no room for anything else. He took her hand, formally, carefully, the way you handle something whose value you understand, and looked at her with the open face and said, "Will you stay?" Yes, she said, simply. He exhaled, quietly, and at the sound of something long held finally released, his hand around hers, careful and certain. Outside, the rain was letting up. The fire shifted. In the room above them, the Duchess slept. They married in February, which the Duchess said was the only sensible month for a wedding, because the cold kept guests from lingering. Mara wore her mother's pearl earrings, the only jewelry she owned, carried in a handkerchief from house to house for 4 years without examining why. She understood why now. At the reception, the Duchess took her arm and said, without preamble, "I told him in October." "I know," Mara said. "He didn't listen immediately." "He rarely does. He gets that from his father." A pause. His father also came round eventually. It took a similar degree of patience. Mara looked across the room to where Edward stood talking to his cousin, composed, assured, the Duke in full public form, and watched him glance over at her with the expression she now knew as the one he reserved for rooms where he was performing and she was present. The one that said, "I see you seeing through this, and I am glad you are here." She raised her glass slightly. The ghost of a smile crossed his face. "He counted 47 seconds, she told the Duchess. The Duchess stared at her, while pretending to be asleep. A silence. Then, good God. She looked across the room at her son with the expression of a woman recalibrating several decades of understanding. "He is entirely his father's son." Mara laughed, the real kind, unguarded, and the kind that arrived before she could style it. And across the room, Edward turned fully toward her with the expression that had no performance in it at all. Just the honest face of a man who had spent 12 years in careful management and had found in a library in November the one room where none of it was necessary. He held her gaze from across the room. She held it back,